The digestion of food starts as soon as we put food in our mouth. Our teeth cut the food into smaller pieces, and the salivary glands secrete saliva that mixes with these food materials. The saliva contains an enzyme called salivary amylase. Salivary amylase breaks down the carbohydrates into smaller molecules like sugars. Breaking down the large macromolecules into simpler components help the body to digest starchy foods like pasta, rice, or potatoes. However, the activity of this enzyme is strongly affected by several factors such as temperature and pH. And for this activity, we will determine the activity of the salivary amylase and the effects of particle size on its activity. Shown here is the result of the conducted exercise. Small biscuit, it took an average time of 10 minutes to dissolve. Large biscuit, it took an average time of 18 minutes to dissolve completely. The banana, it did not dissolve. The hard-boiled egg, only the egg yolk dissolved, and the egg white did not. Comparing the time to dissolve the small and large biscuit, we can observe that smaller size dissolved easily compared to the larger one. So the cracker in our tongue, the saliva starts to break the bonds holding the cracker together as well as mix with it. This makes the biscuit softer and easier to swallow. So because the biscuit contains lots of starch, we were able to dissolve this completely. The saliva contains the enzyme called amylase that breaks down starch into simpler sugars such as maltose and dextrine. So, however, dissolving the crackers depends on saliva molecules colliding with the outer surface of the crackers. A given quantity of crackers dissolved faster when it is in smaller pieces than if it is in the form of large chunk because more surface area is exposed. The main component of unripe bananas contain up to 80%, but during ripening, the starch is converted into sugars and ends up being less than 1% when the banana is fully ripe. Whereas egg whites are made up of around 90% water and 10% protein. Since amylase can only break down the alpha-glycosidic bonds that break down glucose subunits in starch, it cannot break apart the ripe banana and the egg white. Amylase enzymes selectively cleave the type of glucose-to-glucose bond found in starch. For example, is that amylase cannot break down proteins in egg white, which are chains of amino acids and cannot break down starch. Let's look at what saliva contains. Saliva contains these bicarbonate ions. Bicarbonate ions will attempt to make the saliva alkaline, anywhere from slightly acidic to neutral to alkaline is the pH of the saliva. Some of the things that we eat and the various bacteria in our mouth can alter the pH. So these bicarbonate ions serve to make our mouth a little more neutral to somewhat alkaline. The saliva also contains mucus. The mucus lubricates the food because when we chew or we masticate our food, we don't want to cause abrasions in the lining of our mouth. We also have enzymes associated with the saliva. These include salivary amylase and the lingual lipase. Salivary amylase is going to break down starch. Starch digestion begins in the mouth. And then the lingual lipase will break down fats. However, lingual lipase is not activated until it reaches the stomach. The saliva also contains lysozymes. Lysozymes are antibacterial, so those are going to kill any bacteria that may have come into our mouth with the food. They can also prevent tooth decay. We have 3 types of saliva glands, all of which produce saliva, which will then essentially are going to enter into the oral cavity located around here where the tongue is. Now, sitting below the tongue, we have the 2 sublingual salivary glands. Under the mandible, the lower jaw to the back of the mouth, we have the 2 submandibular saliva glands. And then we have parotid glands, which is the largest salivary gland, sitting posterior to the masseter muscle and anterior to the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Each salivary gland have ducts which will drain into the oral cavity, the mouth. The parotid duct here is the parotid duct here, the submandibular duct, and the sublingual ducts drain into the oral cavity. Saliva is produced and secreted into the mouth, producing an alkali substance. But interestingly, the submandibular gland produces majority of the saliva, roughly 70%. Second is the parotid glands, which is about 25% of saliva production. So in conclusion, saliva contains special enzymes that help digest the starches in our food. An enzyme called amylase breaks down starches. These are complex carbohydrates. They turn them into sugars, which our body can more easily absorb. Dissolving food depends on saliva molecules colliding with the food particles. The smaller the size, the larger the surface area for the saliva can cover, so faster rate of dissolving.